12 warriors entered Blackroot Forest. Only one returned, and when the Cimmerians saw him emerge from the trees at dawn, they almost reached for their weapons. His body was covered in dried mud, soot, and blood. His sword hung across his back, chipped and scarred from blows that would have broken lesser steel. But it wasn't the sword that made them stare. It was the bow. Conan had entered the forest carrying only his blade and a knife. Now he held a crude bow carved from the wood of Blackroot Forest itself. 3 arrows remained in the quiver on his back. Their stone heads were wrapped in hardened resin and blackened cloth. Thin columns of smoke still drifted between the ancient pines behind him, while scattered embers glowed faintly beneath the trees, as though the forest itself had fought through the night. No one welcomed him home. No one asked what had happened, because every warrior standing there already knew one thing. For generations, Blackroot Forest had swallowed every hunting party that entered its shadows. No man had ever walked back out, until Conan. But Conan hadn't conquered the forest. He had survived the last hunter of a forgotten world. 5 days earlier, he believed he was entering those woods as the hunter. He couldn't have been more wrong. The snow had not yet melted from the northern valleys when the messenger arrived in Cimmeria. He carried no banner, no horse, no armor. Only torn furs stained with dried blood. The villagers watched in silence as he crossed the frozen settlement. He never looked anyone in the eye. When the elders questioned him, he answered with only one sentence. "They're all gone." No one asked who. They already knew. Another hunting party had disappeared inside Blackroot Forest. It was the 6th in less than 2 years. The strange part was not that men died. Men always died. The strange part was that no bodies were ever found. No camps. No broken weapons. No signs of battle. It was as if the forest swallowed entire warbands without leaving a single trace. Old women whispered about cursed spirits. Children claimed they heard voices carried by the wind. The oldest warriors said something different. They simply stopped entering those woods. Conan listened without speaking. He had crossed deserts where entire armies vanished beneath the sand. He had climbed mountains where avalanches buried kingdoms. He had walked ruins haunted by things no civilized man would believe. Forest did not frighten him. Men created legends whenever they could not explain failure. The following morning, a war chief named Bragi gathered 12 volunteers, not boys eager for glory, veterans, men whose bodies carried decades of scars, hunters, trackers, axes sharpened countless times. None of them smiled. Even the bravest avoided looking toward the dark line of trees rising beyond the snow. Before sunrise, an old woman approached the group. She carried a necklace made from carved animal teeth. Without asking permission, she placed it around Conan's wrist. He frowned. "I don't wear charms," the old woman nodded. "I know." She removed her hand. "It's not for luck." Conan looked at her. "For what, then?" Her cloudy eyes remained fixed on the forest. "So it knows you're still human." Several warriors laughed. One spat into the snow. Another muttered that fear had made the old woman mad. Conan untied the necklace and handed it back. "I'll trust my steel." She accepted it without another word. But as the 12 men disappeared beneath the towering pines, she began to pray, not for victory, for someone, anyone, to come back. The forest swallowed sound almost immediately. Snow muffled every footstep. The wind disappeared beneath the endless canopy. Even birds seemed unwilling to cross those branches. Hours passed. No animals, no tracks, no broken twigs, nothing. Bragi frowned. This place should be full of deer. One hunter knelt beside the frozen earth. No rabbits, another looked toward the trees. No wolves. Conan said nothing. He was listening, not to what he heard, to what he didn't. Every forest had life. Leaves moving, birds calling, branches cracking, insects breathing. Here, there was only silence. It was not peaceful. It was waiting. As afternoon faded, they found the first sign, not of an animal, of a man. Half buried beneath fresh snow lay a broken spear. Its wooden shaft had rotted with age. Its stone blade was unlike anything Conan had ever seen. Dark gray, perfectly shaped, too large for any normal warrior to throw. Bragi lifted it. The weapon was astonishingly heavy. He looked around. No Cimmerian made this. Conan examined the impact buried deep into the frozen ground. The spear hadn't fallen. It had struck with terrifying force. As he studied the mark, he noticed something beside it. A footprint, bare, human, enormous, longer than Bragi's forearm. Conan slowly placed his own boot beside it. Even his foot looked small. No one spoke. Then, from somewhere high above the trees, a single branch snapped. Not ahead, not behind. Above them. The sound never came again. For several long seconds, every warrior stared into the branches above them. Nothing moved. Only layers of dark pine needles swayed gently in the cold wind. Bragi exhaled. A squirrel? No one answered. Conan kept his eyes fixed on the canopy. A squirrel would have kept moving. Whatever had broken that branch had stopped. It was watching. The war chief signaled the group forward. Keep moving. We make camp before dark. The deeper they walked, the stranger the forest became. Every tree seemed older than memory itself. Their trunks were so wide that 4 men together couldn't wrap their arms around them. Roots twisted across the ground like the backs of enormous serpents. The sunlight slowly disappeared until the forest floor looked like perpetual dusk. One of the younger warriors finally spoke. "I don't like this place." Another laughed. "You don't like every place." The joke died almost immediately, because they all heard it, a distant knock. Wood against wood, once, then silence. Several minutes later, it came again, closer. Toke, toke. Bragi frowned. Woodpecker. Conan slowly shook his head. "No. How do you know? They don't strike that slowly." Nobody argued. By sunset, they reached a clearing surrounded by towering pines. It wasn't a good place to sleep, but there were no better options. The men gathered fallen branches while 2 hunters searched for fresh water. Conan watched them disappear between the trees. He memorized the direction. The campfire burned low. No one spoke much. The silence of the forest seemed to swallow every conversation before it could grow. Nearly an hour passed. The 2 hunters never returned. Bragi stood. "They're late?" One warrior smiled nervously. "They probably found game." Conan was already on his feet. They would have called. 6 men grabbed torches. Conan took the lead. The snow preserved every footprint. Finding the trail was easy. Following it became impossible. The tracks simply ended, not faded, not covered, ended. 6 pairs of footprints entered a narrow passage between 2 ancient trees. Only 4 came out. The snow beyond remained untouched. One warrior whispered, "Impossible." Conan knelt. His fingers brushed the frozen ground. No blood, no struggle, no drag marks, nothing, as though two grown men had simply ceased to exist. Then he noticed something. Above, a broken strip of leather hung from a branch nearly 20 feet high. One of the missing hunters had worn that exact strap around his axe. Conan climbed the tree without hesitation. The higher he went, the colder the air became. He reached the branch. The leather wasn't torn. It had been cut cleanly with a stone blade. He looked farther ahead. Another branch. Fresh scratches. Something enormous had moved across the canopy. Not climbing, walking. Tree to tree. His expression hardened. He climbed down. "It's above us?" Several warriors instinctively looked upward. Conan immediately growled, "No." "What?" "If it's hunting, that's exactly what it wants." The men lowered their heads again. Every shadow suddenly felt alive. They returned to camp in complete silence. Only 4 torches came back. Questions filled the clearing. No answers came. Bragi ordered double watches. No one leaves the fire. The night dragged endlessly. The flames crackled. The wind whispered through the branches. Nothing else until one scream, short, violent, then silence. Everyone jumped to their feet. One of the sentries was gone. His spear still leaned against the log where he had been standing only moments before. Conan rushed outside the circle of fire. Fresh footprints. Not the sentries. Huge, bare, pressed deep into the frozen earth. The stride alone was terrifying. Whatever made them weighed more than any horse. They followed the tracks only 20 yards. Then they disappeared again. Not because the creature vanished. Because it had climbed. Conan slowly raised his eyes. Darkness. Nothing but darkness. Then 2 faint reflections. High among the branches, like eyes catching the firelight, they blinked once, and were gone. One nervous warrior loosed an arrow. It vanished into the canopy. No cry, no impact, nothing. Then something fell. Not from the tree they had aimed at, from another one, much farther away. It landed with a wet sound, the missing sentry. His body struck the snow so hard the ground shook beneath them. Every bone in his neck had been crushed. No cuts, no bite marks, no trophies taken. Just a man dropped from the darkness, as if whoever hunted them wanted only one thing: to remind the survivors that escape was no longer possible. Conan stared into the endless black canopy. For the first time since entering the forest, he stopped thinking like a warrior and started thinking like prey. Morning brought no relief. The men had hoped daylight would expose whatever had been stalking them through the trees, but the forest seemed determined to keep its secrets. Thick branches swallowed the sun, leaving the ground beneath them locked in a permanent twilight. It was impossible to tell whether hours had passed or only minutes. No one mentioned the sentry who had died during the night. His body had been left beneath a cairn of stones. In Cimmeria, a warrior who died with a weapon in his hand needed no speeches. Bragi studied the direction of the rising light through the pines and pointed with his axe. "We keep moving south." No one objected. Standing still felt far more dangerous than walking. For most of the morning, nothing happened. That was somehow worse. Every snapping twig made the warriors tighten their grip on their weapons. Every gust of wind seemed to carry footsteps that disappeared the moment anyone stopped to listen. Even the silence had become an enemy. Conan stayed near the rear of the group, not because he feared an attack from behind, but because he wanted to study the trail they left. Whoever was hunting them had never attacked at random. There was a pattern. He simply hadn't found it yet. Hours later, one of the hunters suddenly stopped walking. There, he pointed toward the snow. A massive footprint had been pressed into the frozen ground beside one of the trees. It was fresh. The edges hadn't frozen. Conan knelt beside it. The shape resembled a human foot, but it was impossibly large. The toes were longer, wider, almost powerful enough to grip the earth itself. Whatever had left the print carried tremendous weight, yet the surrounding snow showed only a single step. No trail, no second footprint. Nothing. Raggy frowned. How does a man leave only one track? Conan slowly raised his eyes toward the towering branches overhead. He doesn't. The realization spread through the group like cold water. Several warriors instinctively looked upward. The forest above them was a maze of enormous limbs stretching from tree to tree. Many of the branches were thick enough for a horse to walk across. A man, a very large man, would never need to travel on the ground. They continued in complete silence. No one laughed anymore. No one mocked the old stories. By midday, the trees began to change. Ancient symbols had been carved into their trunks long before any Cimmerian had been born. Some were nearly swallowed by bark that had grown over them through countless winters. Others still showed crude figures of towering men carrying axes made entirely of stone. One of the older warriors stopped to examine them. "I've seen markings like these before." "Where?" He swallowed before answering. "On graves." Conan ran his fingers across one of the carvings. The stone blade in the figure's hands looked strangely familiar. It was almost identical to the broken spearhead they had found the day before. The same black stone, the same shape, the same craftsmanship. Whoever had carved these trees belonged to the same people. A sudden whistle sliced through the air. Conan reacted without thinking. He grabbed the nearest warrior by the shoulder and threw him sideways. A heartbeat later, something slammed into the trunk behind them with a deafening crack. The entire tree shuddered. It wasn't an arrow, it was a spear. A stone spear nearly as tall as a man. Half its length buried itself inside the ancient pine. The impact split the bark from top to bottom. Every warrior turned toward the direction from which it had come. Nothing. Only endless rows of dark trees. Conan walked toward the spear and wrapped both hands around its shaft. He pulled. It didn't move. 2 more warriors joined him before the weapon finally tore free from the wood. The 3 men stared at each other. No ordinary man could have thrown it that far. No ordinary man could have driven solid stone that deep into living timber. Conan looked once more into the forest. For the first time, he stopped asking himself what was hunting them. Instead, another question took its place. What kind of man possessed the strength to hunt like this, and had been doing it long enough for an entire forest to become his kingdom? The spear changed everything. Until that moment, the warriors had been telling themselves stories. They spoke of curses, spirits, forgotten gods, and creatures hiding among the trees, because those explanations were easier to accept than the truth. Now the truth stood before them. Something living had thrown that weapon, something powerful enough to drive stone through ancient timber, and something intelligent enough to remain unseen afterward. The forest no longer felt mysterious. It felt occupied. The group moved again, but the confidence they had carried into Blackroot Forest was gone. They walked closer together now, their eyes constantly searching the shadows between the trees. Every branch seemed capable of hiding an enemy. Every patch of darkness appeared deeper than it should have been. Conan noticed another change. The hunter was no longer simply observing them. He was guiding them. At first it seemed impossible, yet the signs became harder to ignore with every passing hour. Whenever the warriors chose a direction, they eventually encountered something that forced them elsewhere. A fallen tree blocked one path. A deep ravine cut through another. Dense walls of thorn-covered brush turned a third into an impassable maze. Each obstacle pushed them toward the same destination. None of the men realized it. Conan did. He said nothing. Not yet. By late afternoon, the snow beneath their feet began to disappear. The ground became darker, softer, covered with thick roots and damp earth. The trees grew even larger here, their trunks twisting upward like pillars, supporting the roof of some forgotten temple. Then they found the bones. At first there were only a few. A skull beneath a tree, a rib cage half buried beneath moss, a broken femur protruding from the earth. But as they continued forward, the remains became impossible to ignore. Bones lay everywhere. Animal bones, human bones, some ancient, some disturbingly fresh. The forest floor seemed built upon layers of death. One of the warriors stopped beside a skeleton whose rusted sword still rested between its ribs. The stories were true. Nobody answered him. The evidence surrounded them. This place had been feeding on men for generations, perhaps centuries. Bragi ordered the group forward. The command sounded stronger than he felt. Conan could see it in his eyes. The war chief was afraid, not of dying. Every Cimmerian accepted death. He was afraid of never understanding what hunted them. That fear was far worse. As dusk approached, the forest suddenly opened before them. The warriors stepped into a massive clearing unlike anything they had seen since entering Blackroot Forest. For several moments nobody spoke. The place felt wrong, not because it was empty, because it wasn't. Ancient stone pillars stood scattered throughout the clearing. Most had fallen long ago. Others remained standing, worn smooth by centuries of wind and snow. Strange symbols covered their surfaces. Some resembled hunters. Others depicted enormous figures carrying axes and spears. One carving immediately drew Conan's attention. It showed a giant man standing among smaller warriors. The smaller men knelt before him, not in worship. In fear, Conan approached the weathered stone. His fingers traced the ancient grooves. The figure looked familiar. Broad shoulders, massive arms, a stone weapon held across its chest. Almost identical to the hunter they had been tracking through signs and shadows. A cold realization settled over him. The giant was not protecting this forest. The forest belonged to him. The clearing had once been a settlement, a kingdom. Long before Cimmerians walked these mountains, long before memory. One of the younger warriors called out. Conan turned. The man was standing near the center of the clearing. What is this? Something protruded from the earth nearby. A wooden shaft, weathered but intact. The warrior grabbed it and pulled. The object came free. Not a branch, not a spear, an arrow. A gigantic arrow, nearly 6 feet long. Its stone head was larger than a man's hand. The warriors exchanged uneasy glances. No ordinary bow could fire such a thing. No ordinary man could even draw it. Then came a sound, not from the trees, not from above, from somewhere beyond the clearing. A deep crack echoed through the forest. Then another. Then another. The noise resembled wood breaking under tremendous pressure. Conan immediately understood. Something was moving, not quietly anymore. The hunter wanted them to hear him. The warriors formed a circle, weapons raised. Their eyes searched every shadow. The cracking sounds grew louder, closer. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath each step. Then everything stopped. Silence returned. A terrible silence. The kind that exists just before violence erupts. Conan's instincts screamed at him. Leave. Now. But they were already too late. A shape appeared between the trees on the far side of the clearing. For the first time, the hunter revealed himself. Not completely, only enough. A massive silhouette emerged from the darkness, tall enough that its head nearly touched the lower branches. Its body was wrapped in layers of fur, leather, moss, and old trophies taken from countless hunts. Across its face rested a mask fashioned from the skull of some ancient beast. The figure remained motionless, watching, studying, waiting. Even from that distance, its size was difficult to comprehend. No man should have been that large. No man should have survived that long. The warriors stared in stunned silence. And that was exactly the moment the hunter had been waiting for. Because while every eye remained fixed on the giant, no one noticed the second spear descending from the trees above them. The spear struck with enough force to throw Hakon backward through the air. His body crashed against one of the ancient pillars before collapsing into the snow. No one had even seen where the weapon came from. The giant never moved. He simply watched. Bragi raised his axe. Formation. The surviving warriors instinctively closed ranks. For the first time since entering Blackroot Forest, they stood together instead of running. The giant took one slow step forward. Then another. Each footfall echoed through the clearing like distant thunder. Conan tightened his grip on his sword. He could finally see the hunter clearly. The scars, the stone axe, the ancient skull that hid his face. He wasn't a beast. He wasn't a spirit. He was a man, just older than memory itself. Bragi stepped beside Conan. He bleeds. Conan looked at him. What? Bragi nodded toward the fresh blood running down the giant's shoulder where Conan's earlier arrow fragment had grazed him. He bleeds. A grim smile crossed the old warrior's face. If he bleeds, we can kill him. For the first time in days, hope returned. Bragi pointed deeper into the forest. We hunt him. The giant did not react. He simply disappeared between the trees, as though inviting them to follow. Bragi refused to leave Blackroot Forest. The moment he had seen the giant standing between the trees, every thought of retreat disappeared. If we walk away now, he said, his voice carrying through the clearing, this thing will still be here when our sons grow old. No one argued. Every warrior knew he was right. Whatever hunt of these mountains had survived because every hunting party before them had chosen escape over battle. Bragi would not become another forgotten skeleton beneath the snow. The remaining Cimmerians spent the last hours of daylight preparing for war. Young pines were cut and bent into heavy spring traps. Deep pits were dug where the ground was soft enough to hide sharpened stakes beneath leaves and fresh snow. Rawhide ropes stretched between ancient trunks, waiting to tighten around the hunter's legs. Huge dead logs were balanced high above narrow passages, ready to fall with a single pull. Every man worked without complaint. Every man believed that together they could kill the creature. Only Conan remained uneasy. He watched the forest more than the traps. Nothing interrupted their work. No spear, no footsteps, no movement in the branches. The silence itself felt wrong. It was as though the hunter wanted them to finish. As darkness settled across the forest, Bragi positioned the survivors around the clearing. No fires, no voices, only patience. Then a branch cracked somewhere beyond the trees. Every warrior tightened his grip. Another crack, closer. The massive silhouette emerged exactly where Conan expected. The ancestral hunter stepped into the clearing without hesitation. He walked slowly, carrying the enormous stone axe across one shoulder, his skull mask fixed toward the waiting men. He wasn't searching. He already knew they were there. Bragi raised one hand. The hunter took another step, then another. His enormous foot came down directly onto the concealed pit. The earth collapsed beneath him. Wooden stakes shot upward. Rawhide ropes snapped tight around one leg. A massive log crashed down from above. The clearing exploded with movement. Now, every Cimmerian charged at once. For a single glorious heartbeat, it worked. The giant disappeared beneath falling timber. Dust, snow, and broken branches filled the air. Several warriors shouted in triumph. Bragi smiled. Conan did not. Because the forest had become silent again, then the log moved. Not slowly, violently. The enormous trunk was thrown aside as though it weighed nothing. The hunter rose from the shattered trap. One stake had pierced his thigh. Another had cut across his shoulder. Dark blood ran beneath his gray skin. He was wounded, but he was far from defeated. His stone axe swung once. The nearest warrior disappeared beneath the impact. There was no scream, only the sound of bone breaking. Another man rushed from the side. The giant caught him by the throat with one hand and hurled him into an ancient pillar. The stone cracked before the man's body slid lifelessly to the ground. The formation collapsed instantly. Years of fighting beside one another meant nothing inside Blackroot Forest. Panic spread faster than commands. Bragi roared for them to hold the line. Only two answered. The others were already moving. Exactly as the hunter intended, Conan stepped forward. Steel met stone for the first time. His sword carved across the hunter's ribs, opening a deep wound. The giant looked down at the blood, then back at Conan. For the first time, the creature acknowledged him, not as prey, as a threat. Bragi seized the opening. With a roar worthy of every Cimmerian king before him, he drove his axe into the hunter's shoulder. The blow landed hard. The giant staggered. Bragi laughed. "I told you. He bleeds." Then everything changed. The hunter reached up with one enormous hand. He grabbed the haft of Bragi's axe, crushed the wood until it splintered apart. Before Bragi could react, the stone axe swept through the air. The old war chief never even hit the ground. He was thrown several yards across the clearing, crashing against a fallen pillar with enough force to break it in half. He did not rise again. Conan felt something he had not felt since childhood: helplessness. The remaining warriors fought bravely. None survived for long. One disappeared into the branches above after trying to climb. Another was struck down while attempting to drag Bragi's body away. The last charged screaming with nothing but a knife. The forest swallowed him. Then silence. Only Conan remained. The hunter turned toward him. Neither moved. The wind carried the smell of blood between them. Conan tightened his grip on his sword. Every instinct told him to attack. Every lesson of his life demanded it. But another instinct, one older than pride, whispered something else. Every man who had fought this creature as a warrior was now dead. If Conan fought the same way, he would join them before dawn. The hunter took one slow step forward. Conan stepped back, not in fear, and understanding. He disappeared into the darkness between the trees. Behind him, the clearing remained covered with broken traps, shattered weapons, and the bodies of every Cimmerian who had entered Blackroot Forest. The hunt had ended. Now, the real hunt was about to begin. Night settled over Blackroot Forest once again, but this time the darkness belonged to both hunters. Conan moved without haste, placing each step with the same care he had seen the giant use for days. Mud covered every patch of exposed skin. Pine resin masked the smell of sweat, while damp moss wrapped around his boots softened his footsteps against the forest floor. He no longer walked like a warrior marching toward battle. He moved like an animal that had learned the language of the woods. Bragi and the two surviving Cimmerians followed several yards behind, each carrying one of the crude torches Conan had prepared before leaving their last camp. The flames remained unlit. Not yet. Conan stopped beside an enormous pine whose trunk had been scarred by lightning decades earlier. He crouched and studied the ground. The giant had passed here recently. The prints were unmistakable. Deep impressions pressed into the earth where no ordinary man could have left more than a shallow mark. But something had changed. The tracks no longer circled the Cimmerians. They came directly toward them. Conan smiled. He knows. Bragi frowned. He knows what? That we're hunting him. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Conan looked into the darkness between the trees. Good. The hunter had accepted the challenge. That meant he would finally make a mistake. Conan signaled the others to spread out. Not far, just enough to appear separated, just enough to tempt an attack. The forest became silent again. Minutes passed. Then nearly an hour. The cold settled into their bones. Every shadow seemed alive. Suddenly, one of the torches slipped from a warrior's frozen hand. It struck a rock with a dull crack. The sound echoed through the trees. Conan didn't move. He had been waiting for exactly that. A raven exploded from the branches overhead. Another followed. Then another. Something massive had disturbed them. High above, Conan slowly raised his bow. He didn't look where the birds had flown. He looked where they had been. Nothing. Only darkness. Then, a branch bent. Not much. Just enough. Conan released his arrow. The shaft disappeared into the canopy. An instant later, a heavy thud echoed above them. Not the sound of flesh, the sound of stone. The arrow had struck the giant's mask. A deep growl rolled through the forest. It wasn't the cry of an animal. It was the first sound the ancestral hunter had made since the hunt began. The branches shook violently. The enormous figure dropped from the trees with astonishing speed, landing hard enough to send frozen earth into the air. For the first time, Conan stood face to face with him. The giant towered over every man who had ever lived. His skin was gray and weathered, almost the color of granite. Old scars crossed his chest like cracks in ancient rock. His beard reached almost to his waist, tangled with leather cords, feathers, and the teeth of predators long forgotten. Across his face rested the skull mask that had haunted generations of hunters. Now it was cracked. Conan's arrow had split one side from brow to jaw. Behind it, a single pale eye stared back, calm, focused, not angry, respectful. The giant slowly reached behind his shoulder and drew the enormous stone axe from his back. Its blade looked as though it had been carved from a single piece of black mountain. Conan lowered his bow. He knew another arrow would never be fast enough. Steel met stone. The first blow shattered Conan's shield into splinters. The second buried the giant's axe deep inside the trunk of a pine tree thick enough that 3 men together could barely embrace it. Conan attacked immediately. His sword slashed across the giant's ribs. The blade cut flesh, but only barely. The skin beneath felt harder than boiled leather, strengthened by decades of scars and relentless survival. The giant answered with a single backhand strike that threw Conan several yards across the clearing. He crashed into the roots of an ancient oak, every breath driven from his lungs. The ancestral hunter didn't rush toward him. He waited, watching, testing, just as he had tested every hunter before him. Conan forced himself back to his feet. His ribs burned. Blood ran from his forehead into one eye. He looked around the clearing, at the dry pine resin clinging to the bark, at the dead branches covering the ground, at the crude arrows hanging from his back. Then he smiled. He had not built those arrows to kill the giant. He had built them for the forest. Conan pulled one from the quiver. Bragi understood immediately. Without waiting for an order, he struck flint against steel. The cloth wrapped around the arrowhead caught fire. Bright orange light burst into the darkness. The giant hesitated, only for a heartbeat. It was enough. Conan drew the bow to its fullest, aimed not at the hunter, but high above him, toward the oldest pine in the clearing, and released. The burning arrow disappeared into the darkness above the giant. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the resin exploded into bright orange flame. Fire raced across the dry branches overhead, feeding on years of hardened sap. The ancient pines had stood untouched for centuries, their bark thick with resin that burned hotter than oil. Within seconds, the canopy itself became a river of fire. The ancestral hunter did something Conan had never expected. He stepped backward, not from fear of the flames, but from desperation. For the first time since the hunt had begun, the giant's attention left the Cimmerian. His pale eyes followed the spreading fire as it leapt from tree to tree, climbing higher into the ancient forest. The forest was not merely his hunting ground. It was his home, perhaps the last home his people had ever known. Conan understood it instantly. The giant had never hunted beyond Blackroot Forest. He had never marched against villages or kingdoms. Every warrior who had died here had crossed into his world. The hunter had simply defended it. The realization changed nothing. If the giant lived, no man would ever leave these woods again. The flames climbed higher. Burning branches crashed onto the forest floor, sending showers of sparks into the darkness. The giant roared not in rage, but in grief. It was the sound of a world dying. Then he charged. His stone axe swept through the air with enough force to split an oak in half. Conan barely escaped the first strike. The blade buried itself deep into the earth, scattering rocks and frozen soil in every direction. Before the giant could recover, Conan closed the distance. His sword flashed once, twice, 3 times. Each cut drew blood, but none reached deep enough to stop him. The ancestral hunter answered with a brutal elbow that sent Conan crashing into the trunk of a burning pine. Pain exploded through his ribs. His vision blurred. For several seconds he could hear nothing except the roar of the fire surrounding them. The giant advanced slowly, not because he was tired, because he knew the wounded prey had nowhere left to run. Conan forced himself upright. Blood dripped from his forehead, mixing with the mud that still covered his face. His fingers tightened around the sword. He studied the hunter one final time. The cracked mask, the damaged shoulder, the heavy breathing, the enormous axe, and then the burning tree behind him. The trunk had already begun to split. One more moment, and gravity would finish what the flames had started. The giant raised the axe above his head. Instead of retreating, Conan ran toward him. The unexpected movement forced the giant to hesitate for the first time. At the last possible instant, Conan drove both hands against the giant's chest with every ounce of strength he still possessed. The massive hunter staggered backward, only 1 step. It was enough. The burning pine gave way with a deafening crack. The ancient tree collapsed. Its full weight crashed onto the giant's back, driving him to one knee beneath thousands of pounds of burning timber. Even then, he tried to stand, his arms pushed against the trunk. The muscles beneath his gray skin strained like ropes. Slowly, incredibly, the tree began to rise. Conan stared in disbelief. Any ordinary man would already have been crushed. The ancestral hunter still fought, not for victory, for survival. Conan walked forward through the falling ash. Their eyes met one final time. There was no hatred in the giant's face. Only exhaustion, only acceptance. With slow, deliberate hands, the hunter reached up and removed the cracked skull mask. It fell into the fire. Beneath it was not the face of a monster. It was the face of an old man, ancient beyond imagination. His skin was weathered like carved stone. His white beard reached his chest. Deep scars crossed his cheeks, each one earned through battles fought long before Cimmeria had a name. For the first time, Conan saw him as he truly was, not a beast, not a demon. The last survivor of a forgotten people, the final guardian of a dying world. The old hunter looked toward the burning forest. A single tear carved a clean line through the ash covering his face. Then he lowered his head. Conan understood. The hunt was over. Without a word, he raised his sword. The fire swallowed the clearing. When the first light of dawn reached the mountains, smoke still drifted above Blackroot Forest. The flames had consumed only a small part of the ancient woods before rain finally came. Enough remained for new trees to grow. But the old kingdom hidden beneath those branches was gone forever. 3 days later, Conan emerged from the northern edge of the forest. Alone, his sword rested across his back, chipped and blackened by soot. In one hand he carried the crude bow he had carved from the forest itself. Only a single fire arrow remained. The Cimmerians waiting beyond the tree line stared in silence. They counted the men who returned. 1. They asked no questions. They did not need answers. Everything they needed to know was written across Conan's scars. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, one of the elders approached him. You killed it?" Conan looked toward the endless wall of dark pines. After a long silence, he answered quietly, "I killed the last of them, nothing more." Years later, hunters would once again enter Blackroot Forest. They found no giant, no ancient kingdom, no skull masks hanging from the trees, only old stone carvings slowly disappearing beneath moss and time. Most believed the stories had always been legends. Conan never corrected them. Some truths were better left buried with the people who had lived them. And somewhere beneath the roots of those ancient pines, the last ancestral hunter slept beside the forest he had defended until his final breath, not as a monster, but as the forgotten end of an age that would never return.